Hello, Isaac.
Hello, Rabbi. Good morning. It's great to see you.
Great to see you. So we're still on our question about fasting, and we're on our third similitude. I guess we're going to conclude today what the differences are in our three stories: the bridegroom, the shrunken piece of clothing on a
hmm
patch on an old cloak, and today old and new wine. I don't think about old and new wine very often. I feel that only the very very affluent think like sometimes you see in the news
Yeah.
someone will say, "Oh my God, I just got 100-year-old wine." And I'm lost. I just,
Yes.
if I drink wine, I don't look at the year. I look at
Yeah.
the taste, and it's usually 2000 after 2020 is the years I'm drinking.
Well, you and I, we are in the same boat. It looks like each of this is one step removed. The first one, bridegroom, I could relate to this in some way. In a marriage, I can relate to this. The cloth, yeah, it's a bit step removed. Wine, it's an even more removed. So I'm looking forward to studying, to hear what you have to say, and exploring the scriptures much deeply.
Okay, get started, Isaac.
The Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 9, verse 17. Neither is new wine put in old wineskins. If it is, the skins burst, and the wine is spilled, and the skins are destroyed. But new wine is put into fresh wineskins, and both are preserved.
Okay, so I guess first of all, we should get some of the facts on the ground. So wineskins. I don't know if you've ever seen a wineskin.
I
A
haven't.
wineskin is literally a skin of an animal that they take a string and they tie at one end and they try to put a cap on the end. And that was the kind of flask or canteen that they used in the old days. That'd be very common. So this is not something that is culturally out of sync. This is something that how they would have carried wine and water for that matter when they go in the desert. If you think about it, for the most part, we use plastic, and skins were the plastic of old. The difference is obviously a skin is an organic material. And while you and I both know, like you could, some people have coconuts that they drink from, and it's been sanded, and it's something that the organic material no longer is treated as organic. It's more like wood, where you could just keep using it over and over. So to these skins would do that. But what's the problem that we see of wine is that wine would go through a fermenting process. So when you put water into a flask or into a skin, unless if you dried it out properly and you made sure that the water will stay fresh, you're fine. It'll just stay there for a long time. But wine, a lot of times you have a gurgling process, a bubbling process that as it continues to ferment, it actually releases energy, it releases gas, and it expands. So it could literally become a bomb if you seal something too tight. So there are different. So when the flask or the skin was expanding, it actually could be an issue. So the issues that we are identifying inside of this verse from Matthew is that number one, the difference between new skins versus old skins, number one. Number two, the difference between new wine versus old wine. Number two, the difference between how skins and the flasks can be destroyed based on the wine. And last, how is the wine preserved? So all of those will build into the allegory, into the parable, into the story, and we'll have to kind of analyze this. And I think from a Christian tradition, the reason that this becomes so more important is not even because what Matthew or Mark say, but because what Luke adds this. And I want to note that it does seem to me Luke, throughout the questions about fasting from 9:14, 9:17, does have the most fleshed out perspective. A lot of times when we see there's a problematic word or a problematic phrase, Luke kind of smooths it out. So before we go on and we start analyzing the similitude, I think it would start by, I think you mentioned to me once in passing that this is a very famous similitude in the Christian tradition. And I'd love to hear about how you would hear about this growing up.
Oh, I don't think I meant this. I meant,
Oh,
I
not
think,
this.
not this. I think what I meant was 9, 9, 12, 9, 13, right? So that's
Oh,
what I've got.
9:13. Okay, well, we're not
Yeah,
there yet.
I don't think I've heard, no, 9:30, the one we discussed last week, right? I decided to came, I decided mercy
So
and a
you
sacrifice.
haven't thought about skins that much.
I've barely heard any sermons on this, on old wine, new wine, and old wineskins and new wineskins. It seems so far removed from, from what I would think, what I
It's interesting because as a Jew, number one, we use wine ceremoniously, just like Catholics and Christians do as well. But we use wine ceremoniously very, very often. When we, yeah.
So did people drink a lot? I mean, if you use this word wine, like in back in the day, did was drinking alcohol, wine, was this
So
a common
It
trend.
was both used ceremoniously and it was used for regular gaiety and just eating and drinking. So I think it would just have been commonplace, and that's what's used. The way it's used today, like I think it's the same way it's used then. Some people drink it because they want to get drunk. Some people drink it because it's exciting. Some people just drink it because that is the best drink out there. So Judaism, a lot of times, the reason that we say a ceremony over wine, and also inside of the temple, there would be in the southwest corner of the altar, right outside of the temple, there would be a bowl with two holes in it that they dump wine into it as part of an offering. Many times offerings would be accompanied by, there'd be the meat, obviously, from the animal that was slaughtered. There'd be blood that would be sprinkled onto the altar. There would be flour or a kind of pancake flour oil dish that they would fry and bring that into the altar. They put some frankincense on it. They dump some water into the southwest corner of the altar. So wine is definitely part and parcel of the most important rituals, which are the ones that have to do with the sacrifices in the temple. So it's definitely complex. I think Jews today have a lot of associations even outside of the temple, definitely, but outside of our sanctification rituals with wine. So I'll give you like one thing that I heard like thousands of times growing up, and I never really thought about it, but maybe it has to do with this. So there's a famous thing that a lot of times Ashkenazi Jewry will wait 6 hours between eating meat and milk. So if I eat a hamburger, I'm going to wait an additional 6 hours in order to eat any dairy product. So the reason that we get that is because there's a famous Talmudic text that says, Mar Ukva Bar Chama, he said, I would eat meat after I eat dairy at a certain time period because I am vinegar that is a son of wine compared to my father. So I would eat meat today and he would wait a whole 24-hour period before eating dairy, whereas I wait only to the next meal. So what he's saying is that I am vinegar. So vinegar would be spoiled wine, or you could argue that maybe old wine, but be wine that so that becomes damaged. So spoiled wine is vinegar, and good wine is wine. So wine and vinegar would also obviously be used, as we see from this Talmudic text, as a way to describe people. Wow, you're like I'm like vinegar. You're like wine. I'm the one who's not as good religiously as my father. My father would accept a stringency on himself to wait 24 hours, where I only waited, let's say, 6 hours, 3 hours, whatever, it's the next meal. So I think that we already had, I think we could think of probably thousands of more examples of when people would use wine and vinegar and old wine. Whenever anyone reads the Mishnah, you'll see hundreds of examples of old jars, new jars, putting the wine this way, the wine gurgling out. Is the bubbling wine part of one of the famous questions I remember in a Mishnah's Tel Yom is that the wine that bubbles out, is that part and parcel of the wine? If you touch the bubbles, are you touching the wine? Which is a great like rabbinic kind of question, which is you and I don't care about. But the most famous Mishnah, before we start analyzing this question from Matthew 9:17, I'm going to read you one Mishnah. And I think it gives a great parallel to this and a historical context to it, and maybe how other people in the same generation were really looking at new wine. So I'll start. It's Mishnah, chapter 4, Mishnah 25. And it says, Elisha ben Abuya said, he who learns with a child when you're a child, what is it compared to? Well, you learn information when you're young. And this will definitely relate to what we're saying. So it's compared to ink written upon a new writing sheet. So when you write for the first time on a piece of a cloth, or when you write a piece of paper, how does it look? It looks immaculate. It looks perfect. You write, and what happens if you write something, you just use an eraser? It's smudged under. What happens if you're writing in ink and you try to, if a problem is found in a Torah, what they have to do is they have to carve off or scratch off the parchment because the parchment is made of skin. So you can scratch off. So if you do that, the place under where you write the new ink, it'll be smudged. It'll be messed up. So the Mishnah is saying that when you learn as a child, the first time you learn something, it's what sticks the best. Okay, and what is it compared to when an old man is learning something? To ink written on a rubbed out writing sheet. Okay, so before we analyze this, because this is actually going to build into what we're saying next, I just want you to think about that as we just read the past Mishnah. Sorry, as you read this verse from the New Testament, from Matthew. So we already have first the Mishnah is saying that ink, when you learn as a child, it's much more valuable for indoctrinating you and inculcating you than if you learn something new. So this itself we could do as a comparison to Christianity. And I think 100% we could have used this text for 9:16 to talk on new patches, old patches. But let's leave it for now. Let's go read it a little farther, and then we can see how we want to do with it. So the next line of the same Mishnah says, Rabbi Yossi, the son of Judah, a man of the village of Babylonian, said, he who learns from the young, what is it compared to? To he who eats unripe grapes, he who drinks wine from his vats, and he who learns from the old, to what is compared? To one who eats ripe grapes and drinks old wine. Okay, so now we have exactly our parallels, that we have that someone is saying that when you're young, it's like drinking from new wine, and when you're older, it's like drinking from old wine. In this situation, which one is the good wine? Which one is the bad wine? Can you tell?
Of course, the old, I mean, the one with the young, right? When you're young, you drink from the when you're young, you drink when you're young, you drink from the old wine, but when you're old, you drink from the new wine. So maybe I got
No,
this
no. So
mixed up.
if you want to be wise, you should drink from the old wine because that's the better wine.
The old one, okay, because I kind of lost you between you saying if you want to learn, you want to learn when you're as a kid. If you learn those that sticks, right? The early example you gave, as in, when you write on the mission, when you write on when you write something with fresh ink, it stays over there. But if you write something later on, it can be a bit smudgy. As in, if things you learn when you were young, those are
So there's two
different.
ideas, right? The
I
first one is things when you learn when you're young stick with you.
stick with
Things
you.
when
Yep.
you learn for old stick less with you. They almost have the things you learn when you're old have to replace the old ideas. So that's the
Hmm.
first idea, which again we could discuss in relation to 9:16. But the second idea is that a person who wants to learn best, a person who learns from the old, when you learn not when you're young or not when you're old, but you learn from old people. When you learn from old people, it's because you already have the experience, and that's to someone who eating ripe grapes and drinking old wine. So that's the better. So we have established now the new wine is the worst wine. The old wine is the better wine. And we'll see in different Mishnahs, it actually goes back and forth. But you see that you have this relationship. Okay, and last line of this Mishnah, Rebbe said, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said, don't look at the container, but that which is in it. Don't judge a book by its cover, aka. Don't look at the container, don't look at the skin, look at the wine that's in it. So he goes, maybe you should judge older wine, old wine or young wine. You should judge by what kind of wine is it. There's a new container full of old wine and an old container which is not even new wine. So we see over here also that ambiguity that it goes back and forth. But in short, Rebbe is saying that sometimes you'll have a a new container, and that's probably and it'll be full of old wine. So you have to evaluate the situation based on not by judging. Okay, so now we have a background of old wine, new wine, bad skins. So now I think we can use this context to try to understand what's happening in Matthew 9:17. So he says, neither is new wine put into old skins, otherwise the skin bursts. So first he starts off by new wine in this context, I think he means is still fermenting wine, as opposed to already fermented new wine. I think it's very important for us to make that that point, because otherwise it can burst. So normally when a wine is done fermenting, it will not burst. But over here, it does burst because it's still fermenting. The skins are destroyed. So what do we think that this is saying about Christianity? I think that's the most important thing that we want to discuss. I think it somewhat should be a little bit obvious to us that the old wineskins, based on our last two similitudes, seems to be Judaism, seems to be Pharisaic Judaism.
So,
And yes,
Rabbi, can I? So, I did reflect on this past week, right? So we also established that Jesus was a type of sectarian rabbi, a sectarian leader within Judaism, just the way John the Baptist was a sectarian leader within Judaism. So they're mainly, again, they're Jewish, they're sectarian, they have their extreme views, one could call it, right? And so was Jesus really trying to build a different religion? Like Christianity, we know later on grew a different religion, right? So now we use the term over here, old wine, new wine,
so,
and the word
I
Christianity
can't
more
answer
loose.
that question, but I could say that Paul was, right?
Well,
So
yeah,
the question you should probably ask is Paul a follower of Jesus? or is Paul a follower of Paul? Because at the end of the day, what Paul was doing with the religion obviously had overlap with what Christianity was trying to do. But if you wanted to say that Paul was not following Jesus' teachings, but really following a version or an interpretation, or maybe the next level of it, I think that would probably be an apt statement. So was Jesus trying to start another religion? So it seems no, because there was room in Judaism for sectarianism. The fact that we have the Essenes, the fact that we have the Sadducees, the fact that we don't talk about other groups, the Sicarii, and the fact that we never talk about the Church of Jerusalem versus what Paul was doing. So it seems to me the Church of Jerusalem saw itself, with James and others, saw itself as the foundation of what Jesus was trying to do. And it seems to me there was a fight. Where was Christianity going to evolve from? From Pauline teachings or from the Church of Jerusalem? And then the day, I think just like, a history settled with Paul. But it's very difficult, even if I would say that, am I following what my rabbi says? In each generation, inherently, there's going to be different challenges, different vicissitudes of history, and we're going to have to evolve just based on that. So the fact that Jesus or is doing not exactly what his teachers taught us, even what John is doing, and the fact that the first apostles are not doing exactly what Jesus is doing or misunderstood him, is a normal step of life. That being said, it doesn't look like Jesus would have felt comfortable if you told him that you're a sectarian, you're a kind of Jew, he'd be like, I 100% agree. If you told him that you're starting a religion, he'd say, no, I'm telling you what the religion should be. That's how I've always understood it.
And so when you look at this passage, right, if Jesus wasn't, I mean, I hear what you're saying, Paul took the path in a different direction. When we look at this passage here, right, if Jesus was not trying to establish a new religion, if he was just trying to point a different way within Judaism, how does this change how does this
I,
change?
a lot of times in religions, we have paradigm shifts. We almost have a Copernican revolution in certain time periods, saying that this is what it is, but it almost gets pummeled to the next level. So when one looks at Maimonides, for example, in the 13th century, and his focus on negative theology, on philosophy, on Aristotelian, Neoplatonic ideas, what he did is he really took Judaism and implanted Judaism into what he was doing, and took what he's doing and implanted into Judaism. So he would tell you, which we'll talk about probably soon in chapter 13. But he would tell you, I'm just telling you what Judaism really says. Everyone, when they look at their religion, a lot of times it's like looking in a mirror. People who want to be focused on offerings all day will say the religion only cares about offerings. People who want to say the religion only focuses on loving kindness will say it's only focused on loving kindness. One of the jokes, I think, I saw a joke recently. I'll see if you like it. He was this comedian was talking about fundamentalists, evangelical Christians, about how they're such literalists about the creation story. And he said that, well, if they want to be literalists about the creation story, the main thing that the Bible teaches you is to be a Jew. So if they want to be so literal, maybe they should focus on that aspect. But I think that the joke is good because it really is pointing out that evangelicals are really choosing the verses that reflect their own ideology. And I think one of the goals, I think, as a religious person is to try to hear what the Bible, what God is trying to say to you, and not just take your own personality and superimpose upon the Bible. That being said, whenever we read a verse, we're interpreting, explaining, expounding, but we're always doing it from our perspective. So even when we try to dispossess the text of ourselves, at the end of the day, we still are viewing it from our own perspective. So it's very difficult to separate ourselves from the text. So Jesus, I would view himself as a sectarian. We're going to see they're going to about to eat some fruit and break the Sabbath, right? Soon. And for Jews, that is going to sound funny. That's probably the most important verse in the whole New Testament. That sound funny? The one I hear the most about throughout my life is that Jesus and his followers ate some fruit on the Sabbath.
The Sabbath.
You know why that's so important for Jews? Because that shows that they weren't Jews. That shows that they were trying to break away. And if they're trying to break away, we don't have to have a dialogue with them. We don't have to care about them. They're Buddhists, they're Hindus, they're Muslims, they're Christians, but they're not.
Well, okay, I'm surprised you say that they are not Jews just because they don't keep Shabbos.
No, it's showing that
Also,
Jesus was not trying to be a Jew.
Yeah,
So
but
I'm not
you
saying
can,
this is true or not. I'm just
yeah,
telling you this is how, when
this
I
is a,
brought up, this is such an important verse. I will talk about this, and I'll tell you how it's probably a bad interpretation. And Jesus doesn't say it's okay. He actually goes and gives a whole explanation. He goes, "Oh, David did this, and I'm doing that." So Jesus doesn't just say, "Go team, I'm a Christian." He gives an explanation. But I'm saying, as a Jew, a lot of times Jews try to separate. There's different attitudes of Christianity and Judaism, and vice versa. I think Vatican II, one of the things that Vatican II tried to do is try to take a step back about saying how condemned Jews really are. And if Jews aren't as condemned, then are Catholics or Christians the new Israel? Because the only reason that you could have a replacement theology where a supersessionism sessionism is when you have a situation where the old religion ceases to be important to God and is thrown away. So these are something that, was Jesus trying to create a religion? I would say definitely not. I say Jesus was trying to be an authentic interpreter of the sect or of the religion. And therefore, I think one of the reasons that Christians rejected Marcion in the beginning is because Marcion went and came along and said, I don't think we need the Old Testament, or the Old Testament was written by, from Gnostic perspective, by the evil God. And I think the reason Christians reject that is because they like to be rooted in history. They like to be rooted in another religion. And that's why, at the end of the day, Christianity is rooted in Judaism. But I would say, when we look at this text right here, so going back to our text, when we saw verse 15, we said that, at least my conclusion was that Christianity is different when Jesus is literally around. You should have a different clarity, a different vision. And the next verse, where it talks about bridegrooms, when it talks about sewing clothing, we said that at the end of the day, the Christianity has to be broken away from Pharisaism, because Pharisaism has a certain way of looking at the world, and the Jesus movement is going to view the world differently, and therefore you can't just stick them into one group. Just because they're fasting doesn't mean you have to fast. We're going to keep Judaism differently, and that's how we saw number two. And number three, what we're seeing now is that even if we thought we could stick them together, we understand that not only would Christianity be destroyed, but Judaism would be destroyed as well. And we saw this in the last similitude as well, that the patch would pull away from the cloak and the tear would be worse. So over there was at least this understanding that maybe we should combine them. Over here, there's an idea that it's going to burst out, the wine is going to be spilled, everything is going to be destroyed. We have to be separate, and therefore, just because they are fasting, we're not going to fast. But what's interesting is that the last line of Matthew, it says, and so both are preserved. And I think a lot of people will focus on that, saying that, well, it sounds like Jesus is endorsing some level of Pharisaism, because he could have just stopped the similitude after that. He said, neither is new wine put into old skins, otherwise the skins burst, blah, blah, blah. But new wine is put into fresh skins, period. But then he adds, and so both are preserved. And I think when you just expand upon this last line of Matthew, we see a more fleshed out version of Luke. When you look at Luke 5:39, we see, and no one after drinking old wine desires new wine, but says the old is good. I think a lot of Christians really struggle with that extra verse in Luke, because if anything, it seems to me it just parallels the last line in Matthew, that the sectarianism was not mutually exclusive. And I think that when you view, for example, the Dead Sea Scroll sect, the Essenes, when you look at the halachic document and you look at the way that their community was established, it was meant to be mutually exclusive. They're saying, like, you guys could try to do Judaism, but you're going to fail. And this is how you live this ideal life. Um, but over here, it's saying that it sounds like fasting is good for them, but it's not good for us. So we see the old is good. It's something that Christians will look at and say that there should maybe be a place for Pharisaism, at least according to Jesus' perspective. And I think when you look back to the Mishnah and you see that sometimes when the ink is written on new sheets of paper, there's nothing that can be done. Those people have Pharisaism locked into them. But if Jesus could get to people and instill to them anew, and not just rub it out, but say this is the only way, then maybe it has a value. But I think this Mishnah really elucidates, this Mishnah from Pirkei Avos really elucidates this text from Matthew, because it really shows you the kind of struggles that how people viewed old and new teachings. An old teaching can be good if it's from a person who's respected, a person who's experienced, if it's from Jesus, maybe. But an old teaching maybe also might be something that can't be rubbed out. It's something that you're just stuck with for better or for worse.
Amen. Yeah. Hmm.
Okay, Isaac, anything else to add?
I think that there's lots to, I think there is lots to kind of reflect on this, right? What he's saying is these two can be separate because then it, so that, or it's, I think the way we explain this, it's not mutually exclusive, but they can be separate. I'm still processing through all this. So when I read all this, right, if he meant all this as a sectarian Jew in one way, right, and so but history took a different turn, and maybe that was his intention, it was not his intention. We don't fully know. Um, wow, that's a bit of a profound shift, and how these messages would have landed, or the to your point, the intent of the author, if
Yeah,
it
it's
was,
difficult. I think for a Christian, it's difficult because I think Christianity is a mutually exclusive religion the way it
yeah.
definitely is today. That if you don't believe at some level Jesus did something, then
You,
then you're not going to heaven. You have a
mhm.
problem. But the question is maybe when Jesus was alive, he could argue that Pharisaism eventually will lead into Christianity. You can make that case that they should be open to it. Number two, you can't make it's hard to make the case he's just threw away all Jews because they're not following him when he just came along a week ago. You had a religion for 1,000 years, and then you got some guy saying this is how this is what you have to do going forward. It's a hard message to be binding on everyone. One of the things that Jews talk about, and I'm sure Christians talk about a lot, is like, how are people saved the year before Jesus was born? And again, there's whole conversations in Judaism. How are people saved before they get the Torah? How are people saved that don't have access to the New Testament, the Old Testament? What happens if you're brought up in Mongolia and you never heard of Jesus? How are you saved? And it's such a famous question. So I think that in the end of the day, all religions kind of have to deal with how are people accessing, salvation when they may not all have equal or any access to the person who's offering salvation. So I think that's what you're kind of pointing out as an issue. Like, what do we do? Like, why would Pharisaism both are preserved? Why would the old is still good according to Luke? That's why I think that the best one is Mark. Mark gets rid of the issue. Mark just says in Mark 2:22, and no one puts new wine into old skins, otherwise the wine will burst the skins, and the wine is lost, and so are the skins. But one puts new wine into the fresh skins, and he doesn't deal with this issue at all. Solved. And that might be the answer. Just throw away the Pharisaisms and Pharisees. Okay, Isaac, I think we'll call it a day.
Yeah, Rabbi, well, on that note, it's been great learning. Thank you. Have a great day.
You too. Okay.